Tetra Master is the card minigame from Final Fantasy IX. It has a reputation of being hard to understand and unenjoyable to play due to its high degree of randomness and is widely seen as inferior to Final Fantasy VIII's Triple Triad. Luckily, the minigame can be ignored for most of the game, aside from one instance where Zidane must take part in a card tournament during the latter half of the story. During this tournament, 3 matches must be played, the first 2 of which need to be won in order to progress, and the outcome of the third doesn't matter. In this short video, I will go over how to play Tetra Master as well as the underlying mechanics that control the random elements. A large majority of the NPCs in Final Fantasy IX can be challenged to a game of cards at any point. In order to take part in a game of cards, the player must have at least 5 cards in their deck. Cards can be acquired from various sources. Enemies sometimes drop them, they can be found hidden around the world, they can be won by playing Tetra Master itself, and they can be purchased leading up to the tournament. There are 100 unique cards to collect, and the player's deck caps out at 100, allowing for one of each card for a complete collection. If your deck is full, any extra cards collected are automatically discarded, so it's important to prune your deck regularly if you're looking to complete the set. Before the match begins, the player must create a hand using 5 cards from their deck. Once cards have been selected, a coin is flipped to decide who gets the first turn. The player is always blue and their opponent is always orange. The game is played on a 4x4 grid. At the start of the match, up to 6 of the available squares are filled with stone blocks at random. These blocks prevent cards from being placed on those squares. Once the match has begun, players take it in turns to lay down cards from their hand in an attempt to capture the opponent's cards. The game is played until both players have exhausted their hand, and the winner is decided by the player who has the most cards in their colour. The winner of the game is awarded a card from their opponent's hand. They are allowed to choose which card they wish to take, but only from the selection of cards that were captured in their colour when the game ended. In the event that the player is able to capture all 10 cards in their colour, they are instead awarded their opponent's entire hand. Now let's talk about how the game works. The defining features of a card are the stats and its arrows. Let's first talk about the arrows since they're easier to understand. The amount of arrows on the card can vary from 0, making the card essentially useless, to having an arrow in each of the 8 directions. The arrows represent the direction each card is able to attack and defend from. If a card is placed in a position where an arrow is facing the edge of a resting card that has no defending arrow, the card is captured automatically. However, if a card is placed in a position where an arrow is facing an opposing card's arrow, a card battle ensues. Combos can be achieved through card battling. After a card battle occurs, the captured card will then capture any of the adjacent cards, assuming that there's an arrow facing in its direction. This can make cards with higher amounts of arrows somewhat of a double-edged sword. On one hand, more arrows allow a card to attack and defend itself in more directions, but they can also be used against you in large combo attacks. Card battles form the backbone of Tetra Master and are the main source of confusion and frustration. Before we look at card battles, let's first understand how the card's stats work. Each card has 3 stats and a class. Stats are represented using hexadecimal digits, going from 0 to 9 and then A to F, with 0 being the weakest and F being the strongest. Each stat is not a defined number, but instead a random number picked from a range. For instance, 0 represents a value between 0 and 15, while a 4 would represent a value between 64 and 79. The first stat is the card's power, representing how strong the card is. The second digit is the card's class, which dictates which of the defensive stats is attacked when the battle takes place. There are 4 classes in total: Physical, P, Magic, M, Flexible, X, and Assault, A. Physical cards attack the physical defense stat, digit 3, and Magic cards attack the magic defense stat, digit 4. Flexible cards will attack whichever of the defense stats is lowest. And Assault cards will use its strongest stat against the defending card's weakest stat. A card's stats and class can improve over time by being used in more card games. Unfortunately, Tetra Master isn't as simple as just playing the card with the highest stats to win. Cards with comparatively low stats still have a chance of winning through sheer luck. To understand why, let's look at an example and go through the calculations that take place. In this example, card A will be your card, and card B will be my card. Let's say that my card is already placed on the grid and you use your card to initiate a battle. First off, the power value of the attacking card is calculated. Card A has a power stat of 6, meaning its power value is randomly selected from a range of 96 and 111. Let's say it rolled 100. We now need to know which defense stat to use. Card A's class is Physical, meaning we need to look at card B's physical defense stat, digit 3. Card B's physical defense stat is 1. This represents a value between 16 and 31. Let's say it rolls 27. Now that both cards have their respective stats, the outcome of the battle needs to be determined. Card A picks a random number ranging between 0 and 100, 100 being the card's power value that we just calculated. Let's say it rolls 83. The same process is also performed for card B. A random number is picked between 0 and 27, 27 being the card's defense value. Let's say it rolled 5. Now that we have these four numbers, we can decide who wins the battle. The deciding calculation is for both cards to take the second value and subtract it from the first. Card A would be 100 minus 83, which equals 17, and card B would be 27 minus 5, which equals 22. The card that achieves the highest difference wins the battle, so in this scenario, my card would win, despite the fact that your card's stats are significantly higher than mine. This just goes to show how much luck factors into each battle. This final section was originally going to be a rant about how unenjoyable Tetra Master is, how the randomness ruins a lot of the potential strategy and overall enjoyment, and how there's no worthwhile reward for investing a lot of time into a side quest that spans the entire game. But during the time I've been working on this video, my opinion towards Tetra Master has changed. I've quite enjoyed playing the minigame now that I fully understand it. It's fun seeing an NPC pull out a rare card that you haven't seen before and doing whatever you can to try and add it to your own collection, and using your knowledge of how the game works to outplay your opponent is satisfying. Don't get me wrong, it's still incredibly frustrating and you will be victim to stuff like this. But I think the general consensus on Tetra Master is a bit unwarranted, and that's partially due to its poor introduction. Within half an hour of starting a new game, you are able to start playing Tetra Master, but the tutorial explaining how to play the game is missable, only being taught by a specific NPC, who will likely mug you. If a new player is able to track him down and start learning about Tetra Master, they'll find that his tutorial leaves a lot to be desired. Only the most basic of rules are explained, and out of all the questions that you can ask him, only 2 of them are actually relevant to understanding how to play. The rest of them are superficial and only relate to matters surrounding the game. There is nothing about how the card's stats work, which is arguably the most important part of the game, as well as one of the harder parts to understand. Without knowing what these stats represent, all you have to work with is the assumption that bigger numbers are better, which in turn leads to even more frustration when you inevitably lose a card battle and can't understand why, because the game never taught you. The re-releases of Final Fantasy IX made a rather feeble attempt at rectifying this by having a minimal tutorial trigger automatically during the first card battle. The word minimal here is doing a lot of overtime. This tutorial explains basically nothing. The other main contributing factor as to why Tetra Master is so often overlooked is that during the early hours, most NPCs will have cards similar to your own, which is to say cards with the lowest possible stats. Because all cards have the same stats, all rolled values are drawn from the same value ranges, making the outcome for each card battle essentially a flip of a coin, making it even more confusing for players attempting to learn the game without external help. As you progress through the game, NPCs will have access to a wider range of cards and stats, creating the potential for more strategy, and allowing players to avoid scenarios where they may lose as a result of bad luck. If Tetra Master had some worthwhile content associated with the questline, I imagine more players would have invested time into learning how to play and would have realised that it's not as bad as some people may say. It would have also incentivized revisiting the game on subsequent playthroughs. I always complete the Chocobo Hot and Cold side quest despite its length, because it awards valuable items and is, for the most part, enjoyable. While I have had fun playing Tetra Master during my most recent playthrough, I doubt I'll ever do it again. There's just no reason to do so. The minigame is enjoyable, but not enjoyable to the point where I want to invest hours of time into playing a game for no tangible reward. Not to mention that some of these cards are extremely rare and time consuming to find. I had to play roughly 200 games just to get this fat Chocobo card to show up a handful of times, and one of those times he played it on the last turn, so it was impossible for me to win it. As it turns out, he just gives you this card for fully completing the Chocobo side quest. No, I'm not angry. By comparison, Triple Triad, on top of being more enjoyable to play, also provides the player with valuable rewards, making it worth your time even if you don't enjoy the game. It's just a shame that playing Triple Triad also involves playing Final Fantasy VIII.